Welcome. Settle in. Let your eyes grow heavy, and let your mind drift back, far back, to a world you've likely never truly imagined. It's just before sunrise in the Valley of Mexico. The air is cool and thin. The shadows stretch long over quiet canals that weave between floating gardens and stone causeways. A city not of myth, but of sweat, ritual, and remarkable order. In the distance, a city stirs, vast, ordered, humming with unseen life. But as a simple market trader, a soul lost among thousands. This is Tenochtitlan, the heart of the Aztec world. And today, you will live one day in its rhythm. It's not as a noble, not as a warrior. There is no coin in your pocket. It's only cacao beans, dried chilies, obsidian blades. God, no clocks, only the sun. And no written laws, just the eyes of the gods, and of the guards who serve them. Let's begin. With the smell of sweat and cocoa, Moctezuma was born to rule. His mother was a high priestess, his father the emperor. Yet he knew neither privilege nor comfort. When he was 2 years old, his father was murdered. The museums there were amazing, but they left me with a lot of questions. Where were the common folk? Where were the marketplaces? Where were the homes of the merchants, farmers, and laborers? Because ancient history is more than kings and queens, it's everyone. And I couldn't find anyone to tell me about them until now. I hope you enjoyed meeting just 2 of the many voices of the Aztec Empire. Now go explore the past. Remember, history matters. Then his brother took the throne and turned the empire against its people. And so Moctezuma grew up under a cloud of fear, anxiety, and war. In his teens, he fled for his life, enduring hunger and exposure in the wilderness until he could hide no longer and had to turn himself over to his brother's men. They locked him in a cage, but he wasn't imprisoned for long. Soon, they brought him before their new emperor uncle, who spared his life, but kept him hostage in the imperial court, watching always as his brother paraded through the city in full regalia, riding on a litter carried by slaves, while Moctezuma spent his days waiting, uncertain of his future, uncertain of his fate. Then when he was 23, all changed. His uncle died, and his brother stepped onto the throne. Finally, Montezuma was next in line. But even now, his path to power was fraught with peril. He made enemies among the nobility who feared he would be a tyrant like their former emperor. So they poisoned his mind, telling him that to secure his legacy, he must eliminate rivals, especially his own kin, reminding him how his father and uncle met their ends. Already haunted by nightmares of bloodshed, Moctezuma responded with paranoia. He ordered suspected traitors put to death. He turned on those closest to him, including his wife and son. And soon he found himself hated by his people, his enemies lying in wait, his allies few and fearful. As he paced his quarters, he knew he had only one way to save his reign, only one way to outmaneuver his foes. He must go to war, far away from the intrigues of his court, past the familiar lands his ancestors had ruled for generations. Beyond the limits of his empire, there was only one direction left to march, west into the unknown. So he assembled his army, tens of thousands of warriors, plus countless support troops, along with hundreds of captives who would serve as human sacrifices to the gods during the coming battles. Then at the head of this great host, Montezuma rode out to war. Days later, his army arrived at the edge of a great lake. On the far shore, his spies reported, lay the enemy. A rival tribe whose ruler had been insulting Montezuma and defying his rule. The emperor watched as his fleet of hundreds of canoes paddled toward the shore, carrying warriors armed with spears, swords, and shields. And he knew his moment had come. With a mighty roar, the battle began. For hours, the opposing forces clashed. Warriors fell on both sides. At the end, Moctezuma stood alone. Before him lay hundreds of slain warriors, but also his fleet destroyed. And nowhere in sight, his army? Defeated, broken, demoralized, Moctezuma retreated back to the capital, where he gathered what strength he could and prepared to defend his city. Back on the shores of Lake Texcoco, the enemy leader surveyed the wreckage of the Aztec fleet and watched the retreating army disappear in the distance. He turned to his warriors and told them the time had come to finish the job. His soldiers cheered and charged across the lake, eager to plunder the great city, eager to conquer the mighty emperor. But little did they know, for them, the worst was yet to come. For weeks, the attacking army laid siege to the city. They cut off supplies, they burned villages. They attacked daily, trying to break through the walls. Day by day, the people of Tenochtitlan grew thinner, hungrier, weaker. And Moctezuma paced his halls, knowing that unless he got help, his city would fall. Now, he didn't have many allies, but he did have one, a powerful lord who ruled a distant tributary state, a state that resented the Aztecs and dreamed of independence. Moctezuma sent him a plea for help, along with a message that chilled the lord to his core. If you do not send aid, I will declare war. And while the two states were technically allied, Moctezuma knew his ally would not dare defy him. Not because he was afraid of war, but because he was afraid of something far worse. The Aztec god of war, Huitzilopochtli, who demanded human sacrifice. Imagine the consequences if the god heard his vassal was refusing his emperor's request. So the tributary lord hastily assembled his army and set out to rescue Tenochtitlan. When the reinforcements arrived, the tides turned. The invading force was forced to retreat, then flee. Soon, Moctezuma stood once again in the shadow of his palace, victorious. But his joy was short-lived. Just a year later, another rival tribe rebelled. Again, Moctezuma assembled his forces and went to war. He led his men in battle, killing and dying on the field, until at last he returned home. Bloodied, weary, haunted by the horrors he had seen. And every day as he looked out over his shattered empire, he asked himself, what now? Now he needed help. Real help. He needed someone strong, smart, ruthless. Someone who could fix his mistakes. Someone who could restore his greatness. So he turned to one of his counselors, a brilliant strategist and commander, Nesawalpili. Under his rule, Moctezuma decided the empire would prosper. That is, if he didn't get in the way. Now it's me. This story was inspired by a recent trip to Mexico City, where I visited the ruins of the great Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan. Ah, the imperial examination system, one of the most unique governmental systems in all of history. It is something so bizarrely alien to our modern conceptions that it almost sounds fake when you read about it. Today we're going to look at the weirdest parts of the Chinese imperial examination system. How did they hire people to work for the government in imperial China? There was no college education system in imperial China, so basically anyone who wanted a government job had to teach themselves. As mentioned earlier, there were four main ones. First, you took the county exams. Another common question was, how would you react to receiving a bribe? Sometimes they asked you to compare and contrast to Confucian philosophies. Other times they asked you to explain a passage from a Confucian book. But maybe the strangest part was that your answer had to follow a strict format. When answering a question, you couldn't just give your opinion. Subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you. No, you had to use specific passages from the Confucian texts to back up your arguments. And if you left out the correct number of references or didn't use a certain phrase in the right place, well, you would fail. So basically, these exams were less about how smart you were and more about how well you memorized Confucian texts. That's why everyone who wanted to take the exam studied for years. Some people spent decades studying for it. Many never ended up taking the exam at all because it was so expensive and hard. If you passed, you were eligible for the provincial exams. The four books were the Analects of Confucius, the Mencius, the Doctrine of the Mean, and the Great Learning. The five classics were the Book of Changes, the Book of Documents, the Book of Poetry, the Spring and Autumn Annals, and the Rites of Chow. The topics covered in these books included ethics, society, religion, philosophy, government, and poetry. But these were just the minimum requirements. If you wanted to be an advisor to the emperor, you better study everything there is to know about Confucianism. And if you passed that, you were eligible for the national exam, and finally, the palace exam. Now, the tests themselves were a bit strange, as the top scorers of the national and palace exams were given a noble title and became a Hanlon Scholar. This was a prestigious honor, and usually came with a noble title. From there, they could be assigned any government position they wanted. But not all of them became advisors. A lot of them went to local posts. After all, someone has to collect taxes in the countryside. You had to be really smart, sure, but also strong-willed and physically fit, especially if you wanted a higher-ranking job. Why? Because you had to take the exams under the harshest conditions. When it came time for the exam, you went to a designated testing center, checked your papers, made sure nothing was hidden, and then sealed your desk with red wax. From there, you were taken to your testing room. This was a small room. It didn't have windows, and it didn't have furniture other than a table and a chair. And if you were taking a higher level exam, the rooms were even smaller. The only supplies you were given were a scroll of paper and an ink brush. Nothing else. No notes, no textbooks, no dictionaries. You were expected to remember everything you knew about Confucianism and write it down. Oh, and you also got a bucket. That's because for the duration of the test, you weren't allowed to leave the room. You had to stay there until you finished your answers. You're in. And if you needed to use the restroom, well, you used the bucket. They were expected to know the classics of Confucianism, basically the religious texts of Confucianism, and this included a lot of reading. The 4 books and the 5 classics, that was the minimum expectation. This amounted to over 10,000 words of Confucian scripture, and that was just the minimum. More prestigious posts required you to know more. If you were striving to be an advisor to the emperor, you better know everything there is to know about Confucianism. Fortunately, there were plenty of teachers and private tutors who could help you study, so this was possible. But it still took a lot of time and money. Also, you had to be male. Fortunately, women couldn't take these exams. Well, through tests? No, not those kinds of tests. Exams. But not like those kinds of exams. Longer, weirder exams. Okay, basically they would gather all the young men who wanted government. Jobs make them sit in a small room for many, many hours, and then ask them questions about how to be a good person and good at government. And after all that, the ones who didn't go blind from writing too much, those were the ones who got the positions. That is what I want to talk about today. What were these exams really like? How did they test people? What did they test people on? And why did they do things this way? Imagine applying for a government position with a test where they make you live in a small room for 3 days while you eat, sleep, use the bathroom, and think. So to start, there were 2 main routes to taking these tests, the civilian and the military. The civilian one was divided into 6 ministries, which were the equivalent of government departments. These were personnel, finance, rituals, justice, public works, and agriculture. The military exams were for becoming an officer. Now, these exams started at the local level, specifically the counties. Every year, each county would hold exams for people who wanted to become local magistrates or minor officials. Now, every 3 years, the provincial exams would be held. The top people from the county exams got to take this one. Those who did well here would earn a middle-ranking official position somewhere in their province. Then every 3 years, the national exams would be held. This tested people on more specialized subjects. Passing this exam meant you could get any mid to high-ranking civil or military post across the empire. Finally, every 9 years, there was the final exam held directly before the emperor. This exam was extremely difficult to pass, and only around 3% of those who took the national exam ever made it here. Passing this test meant you got to be the highest-ranking official in the empire. You got to hang out with the emperor. Basically, you won life. Yeah, you can't imagine what kind of person would go through such an ordeal to get a job. But in Imperial China, this wasn't some eccentric exception. It was the norm. This was how everyone got a government position, from low to high, military to civil. And yes, even eunuchs, because apparently serving the emperor without balls was seen as a very prestigious and important job. Welcome to my channel. Okay, first, let's talk about how the exams worked. Now, let's focus on the civil service exams because the military ones were a little different. First, you had to study. Next, you had to take the exam itself. The exams were held in a series of steps, and each step was harder than the last. The actual questions themselves were often vague and abstract. For example, they might ask you what you would do if your wife misbehaved or if her parents showed disrespect. But what were these Confucian books they studied anyway? Well, the minimum requirement was to know the 4 books and the 5 classics. Finally, let's talk about what happened if you passed. And that's the end of part 4. If you've been here before, you might remember our story about passing the imperial exams, the highest level of which is called the Jinchi. Now, congratulations if you passed. You're officially You have entered the civil service and will be placed in a position somewhere in the empire which raises the question, where do new scholars go? Well, to answer that, we'll have to travel to the Tang dynasty and avoided disasters. He might get lucky and move up the ladder, perhaps becoming a prefect in a big city. Even so, to advance through the ranks, you didn't just need skill and connections. They had to write reports, of course, but also documents about everything from land grants to marriage licenses. This was generally done in the form of a letter asking the emperor to consider some issue or make a decision on a matter. This included buying new clothes, preparing a gift for the emperor, and packing items for a journey that might take months. In fact, many of them never saw the capital at all. Next time we re-gone, see how legal codes developed in ancient China and help Ban Zhao become the first woman to earn the title of Scholar Official. Crash Course was filmed in a studio and made with the help of all these nice people. If you want to help keep Crash Course free for everyone forever, you can join our community on a crowdfunding platform. While there were about 100,000 officials in the empire at any given time, around 30,000 were in the military, and roughly half of those remaining were in the bureaucracy. Most of the rest were scattered throughout the empire, holding minor positions in provincial governments. Here's the thing. Serving the emperor from a remote village was actually an honorable position. It meant that you had been trusted with the responsibility of maintaining order and stability in a crucial part of the empire. It wasn't easy. A low-level official's job required long hours, constant vigilance, and a thick skin. But it also provided a unique opportunity to serve the empire in an essential way. Sure, you probably wouldn't become a famous historian or shape the direction of the empire, but you'd be making sure that the wheels of government continued to turn, and that was important too. It was extremely rare for an official to be summoned to the capital during their first posting. It was more likely to happen after they deserved several years outside and built up a good reputation. When the time came, the official would travel to the capital and present themselves at the palace gate. They would enter the city in procession, walking behind a banner that displayed their official rank. If they were lucky, the emperor would summon them to his court and ask about their posting. This was both an honor and a challenge because an official's presentation was carefully choreographed. Couldn't show too much confidence, but you also couldn't appear too nervous. You had to speak clearly and confidently, but not appear arrogant. You had to dress respectfully, but not ostentatiously. It was a high-stakes game, and the slightest misstep could ruin your career. Writing a memorial was tricky business. If you wrote too plainly, you seemed disrespectful. If you wrote too flowery, you looked arrogant. If your handwriting was poor, you could get demoted. That's because writing in China was more than just putting pen to paper. It was an art form. Each stroke had to be precise. Paper had to be the right color and quality. The ink had to be prepared correctly. Officials often spent 3 days crafting a single page. Once it was finished, it would be rolled up, sealed with red wax, and stamped with the official's personal seal. The finished product should have looked something like this. Then it would be sent to the palace, where it would sit with hundreds of other memorials until the emperor found the time to read it. It could take weeks, months, or even years to get a response, if ever. All of these documents had to be written in perfect classical Chinese, which was more than a little challenging considering how hard it was to hire scribes. In fact, hiring people to help with paperwork was one of the few things that officials could spend their modest salaries on, along with food and prostitutes. Because officials worked long hours and received few holidays, they often had to rely on slaves or concubines to manage their household. There were laws prohibiting officials from doing this, but they were rarely enforced. The downside of taking on a slave or concubine was that they had to be reported in the official household census, which was sent to the imperial court. If the court suspected that the official was shirking their duties and neglecting their household, they could be investigated. You also needed something else: patience. The so-called 9-rank system, used in different forms across the various dynasties, organized officials into a rigid hierarchy. Each rank had a specific salary, clothing allowance, burial specifications, and age at which you could retire. Not to mention some ranks came with titles like Duke, Marquis, or Lord. You get the idea. Getting from the bottom to the top took time. Sometimes it took decades. Many officials ended up spending the majority of their careers, if not their entire careers, in a rural area. In fact, some were assigned there permanently after making a mistake. It's like, say, writing a report with messy handwriting, which was considered disrespectful. The punishment for this offense, which was totally unintentional, was exile to a remote snowy province and meet some real-life historical figures, including this guy, a newly minted scholar official who just got his appointment letter. Most officials, though, never got close enough to the center of power to influence anything. But while life as a low-level official was unremarkable, it wasn't necessarily bad. Officials lived comfortable lives, receiving regular salaries and generous benefits. Plus, if you didn't offend anyone important, you could keep your head down and work in relative peace. Just don't expect to get rich. Don't get involved in politics. That was reserved for the nobility and the eunuchs. He's getting ready to leave his home for his new posting. His family sees him off, but no one knows where he'll end up. That's because civil servants were posted throughout the empire, often very far from home, and they had to make their own way there. They were given no money to travel. Now, as we've discussed before, being a scholar official was a prestigious position. It meant that you had proven yourself through a series of rigorous examinations, and you get to wear a fancy hat while working for the emperor. Now, these reports may seem tedious, and yes, they are. But you have to remember that the central government relied on these reports to understand how much grain each region was producing. Crop failures and famines were common, and the only way the empire could respond to them was by collecting detailed information from officials all over the country. Collecting taxes was another major part of a low-level official's job. This meant visiting homes and shops and having them open their ledgers to ensure that they were paying their taxes properly. Oh, and dealing with tax evaders who might be richer than you. While they did have the power to punish criminals, most officials tried to avoid violence unless absolutely necessary. After all, they were trying to create a good bureaucratic record for themselves. Part of the reason for this was because, while there was technically supposed to be a meritocracy, it was hard to get ahead without knowing the right people. Officials were more likely to get promoted if they had good connections, preferably with high-ranking eunuchs or influential noble families. Additionally, most officials were appointed rather than elected. Yes, that means corruption was rampant. Patronage jobs were common. So why does our new scholar official look so unhappy? Well, partly because, despite his success, he's likely to spend most of his career in a tiny village far from the imperial court. Don't get me wrong, his work would be important. As a low-level magistrate, his job would be to record crop yields, monitor local disputes, and write monthly reports to higher-ups. But unlike the historians of the Imperial Academy, his reports weren't going to change history. Instead, they keep track of things like the number of wells and the number of boats in a district, how many people went through the town's main gate each day, and whether or not anyone committed crimes. Oh, and before we forget, he's also responsible for keeping accounts of the grain storage. Still, if a low-level official kept his head down, worked diligently of course, the top ranks came with considerable power. Grand counselors could influence the direction of the empire, and secretaries of the Central Secretariat were essentially advisors to the emperor. A large part of a low-level official's job was writing. In addition to regular reports, officials were sometimes asked to write memorials to the throne. If an official was summoned to the capital, they had to prepare even more thoroughly. Most officials, though, never made it to the Central Secretariat, let alone the emperor's court. And on that note, this has been Crash Course History. The writing brush trembled in his hand. With too much force, the next stroke would mar the text beneath. So he set it down, poured another cup of tea, steeping it longer than necessary to warm the pot. And when that was done, picked up the scroll again. The imperial river flowed like an uncoiled dragon, carving its way toward the sea. When he had first crossed the Yangtze, the boat had taken 3 days. Now it took half that time. First things first, he supposed. The civil servant was expected to step aside once his faculties dulled or his strength waned. He didn't have to prove himself worthy to be discarded. That was the least of his worries. The empire, after all, required exactitude. Afternoons sipping chrysanthemum tea, watching the wind move the rice stalks. Family wasn't something one took with one when one retired. Family was a distraction, a concern for the common man. A scholar didn't need family. He had books. The simple funeral was for ordinary folk. The elaborate funeral was for scholars. He dipped his brush in black ink and marked the top of the scroll with the jujube year of his death. The 37th year of Emperor Zhang's reign. Then he put the brush down, sat back, and waited. Outside, the sky darkened. Thunder rumbled across the horizon, shaking the paper on his desk. Rain began to fall. Soon, the sound of the drumming raindrops drowned out all other noises. He could hear the water pounding the eaves, pattering against the window screens. He smiled. Finally, some excitement. It hadn't happened in a long time. He looked out at the storm, feeling the vibration in his bones. Now this, he thought, is how to end a long poem. It's what a flourish. It was reserved for those who had dedicated their lives to the study of texts, those who had advanced the understanding of the classics, those who had helped shape the empire through their writings. When he died, he wanted the simple funeral. Let the common people bury him with the respect, due a farmer or a merchant. Let them part the earth with the tools of the harvest. Let them cover him with the grain they had stored. He didn't want the elaborate funeral. Why would he want an elaborate funeral? All that ceremony for what? One final display of loyalty to an empire that had paid him for decades of loyalty with silence? No, he would go quietly. He would fade like the last embers of a long-dead fire. He would disappear like the last word of a forgotten poem. He filled his leisure time learning new styles of calligraphy, tracing the shapes of Chinese characters until his wrist buckled. He practiced the 8 methods of divination, finding patterns in turtle shells and tortoise bones. One day he began to write down his interpretations, creating a manual for others to consult. One day he stopped. Even the writing of his system didn't hold his interest anymore. What was the point of knowing what fortune had in store? He was already living it. Children of neighbors might ask him about the capital, about what it meant to serve the emperor. He'd smile faintly but rarely speak much, not out of secrecy, or once a month. Usually after the summer solstice, he would visit the market and buy a chunk of it to eat. He liked the crunch of it between his teeth, the taste of it on his tongue. Lotus root was said to have medicinal properties. It could cure hiccups, dispel lung-generated illnesses, stop bleeding. Could it cure boredom? He wasn't sure, but he kept eating it, but out of disinterest. The machinery of the bureaucracy wasn't particularly exciting to anyone, not even those who lived it. And so he faded, not tragically, but quietly, not with a crash of drums, but with a sigh. If you couldn't see the seal, you were of no use. If your penmanship wavered, you were a liability. You were shuffled out of the way, your salary continuing to arrive, but your duties going to younger men eager to please. He had seen it happen many times over. The worst fate, he had heard, was to be sent on a special mission, a mission that never came back. Those who went on special missions either died or were executed. Some scholars had claimed it was a myth, but everyone knew better. When Wang Meng lost favor, the emperor sent him to oversee the irrigation projects in the north. He never returned. When Zhuo Xian was accused of impropriety, the emperor sent her on a pilgrimage to the western regions, never to be heard from again. The river had widened because someone had died in its path. People died. The river flowed. Life went on. He had arrived in the capital at 20 and stayed for 60 years. He had watched emperors born and die, good ones and bad ones. He had seen officials climb and fall, heard of some who grew fat on bribes, watched as others were dragged away in the night. The river was wider now, he noted, and left it at that. He had no wish to make enemies with his final entry, not when everything in his life had been about avoiding trouble. How did such a thing happen? The river knew neither hurry nor impatience. The sun rose and set each day. How could the river widen in any one year? Was it the rain that made sense? When it was granted, the emperor might reward years of loyal service with modest gifts. Perhaps a bolt of fine silk or a new robe stitched with the character for virtue. A humble pavilion might be named in his honor in the back corner of a government hall. But more often his name was added to a forgotten ledger stacked high with those who had come and gone before. He would retreat to the countryside, perhaps to the same village from which he had first been plucked, now aged and changed. There had been unusually heavy rains. But how does one measure rain against the flow of a river? He pondered this, then dipped his brush in ink. To make a design, the first stroke must be sure. Each stroke after that could flow. Now it was his habit to write at the end of the day. First, to clear the mind of the day's work. Second, to record the important events of his life. Important being a relative term. In truth, most days were unremarkable, so the task was easy. He wrote of the weather, how hot it had been in the dog days of summer, or how the spring rains flooded the palace gardens. Sometimes he noted passing oddities, like the eunuch who cried during the emperor's birthday celebrations, or how a servant girl hid a lizard in the sleeve of his visiting robe. Most entries ended after a couple of sentences, but this one was different. This entry was for his 60th year, the last year of service, and he wanted it to be remembered, written in the largest characters he could manage. The river was wide that year, wider than any other year he had seen since he arrived in the capital as a fresh-faced young clerk. He had begun his career in the capital at age 20, sent by his father, a local magistrate, to learn the ways of the central government, to understand what it meant to be a member of the literati, to follow the ancient ways. Oh, how earnest he had been. How he studied the classics, trained his calligraphy, memorized histories, so that his tongue tripped off poetry while reciting Confucian virtues. He had dreamed of great works of changing the world. Now, at 60, his greatest achievement was getting the prefect's seal onto a document without smudging the ink. He sighed. Better to be a tired quill in the emperor's hand than a broken sword in the rebel S, his teacher had told him. The words still rang true, though these days the thought of holding a sword was more a joke than anything else. He was little more than a cog in the machine now, shuffling papers around, making sure the documents stamped with the imperial seal got where they needed to go. At times, he felt he wasn't living, only existing, waiting for this moment. For 6 decades, he had been a servant of the state, and as the years wore on, the civil servant's role had changed, slowly turning from one of meticulous scrolls and endless rituals into one of passive guidance. His hair grayed like parchment edges browned by time. His eyes, once sharp and precise, now required the help of a jade magnifier to read the smallest seal. He dipped his brush in the ink, leaving a fat dot on the page. Retirement in Han China wasn't a loud affair. No grand banquets, no gold-plated plaques. It was more of a quiet letting go. When he formally requested retirement through an official petition, the process could take months, or even longer, to be acknowledged. Life there was slower. He spent mornings tending a small garden of scallions and ginger. His wife had died decades ago, his son a few years after that. A lifetime of routines can lead to strange habits. He was fond of lotus root. There were 2 kinds of funerals in Han Dynasty China, simple and elaborate. He sealed his final entry with 2 characters, one atop the other. Above done, he wrote naturally. As our day in ancient China slowly comes to a close, imagine yourself setting down the heavy scrolls, laying down your brush, and stepping away from the crowded halls of bureaucracy. You leave behind the endless waiting rooms, the quiet offices, and the never-ending petitions. There is no fanfare here, no dramatic finale. But in the slow, steady rhythms of everyday lives marked by routine, patience, and quiet endurance. Only the soft closing of doors, the distant murmur of bamboo leaves in the evening breeze, and the faint scent of chrysanthemum tea cooling on a wooden table. History, like sleep itself, often unfolds not in moments of great excitement or thunderous change. The most profound stories are those told softly in whispers through the ages, stories that invite us not to act but to simply be. The scholars, the traders, the officials, all woven into a fabric that holds an empire together, even as they yearn for rest and simplicity. Now as your own eyelids grow heavy and your breathing slows, carry with you this gentle reminder. Sometimes, let your mind drift as the ink dries on ancient scrolls and the world settles into stillness. Good night. Sleep well. Welcome. Find a comfortable place. Let your body relax and your mind settle gently. Imagine yourself far from the bustling streets of Rome, at the very edge of an immense empire. Here the air is cold and damp, the wind carries whispers of distant forests and wild lands, and stone walls rise thick and gray against the sky. This is a place where history isn't told in grand monuments or glorious battles, but in mud, routine, and quiet endurance. In silent ruins. A world far from the marble columns and golden statues often imagined. Today we will step inside the world of a Roman frontier fort, a world of weary soldiers, distant rebellions. Let us begin. The year is 122 AD. It's early morning, and you, a recruit of the 2nd cohort of Lingones, have just finished your shift as a sentry in the watchtower. As the sun rises over the wild northern wastes, you and the other soldiers of your cohort get ready to start your day. You pull on your worn leather armor, threadbare and stiff from constant dampness, and prepare for another day at the fortress. It's been raining heavily the past few days, and the ground is muddy. The bell rings for breakfast. You join the queue of men shuffling towards the mess hall. The barracks fall silent, except for the crackling fire. The other soldiers are already seated at the rough wooden tables, their faces illuminated by flickering oil lamp. Before you are bowls of barley porridge, scraps of dried meat, chunks of cheese. The rain seems to intensify, drumming on the stones, blurring your vision. You look out over the wall, see his body lying motionless near the main gate. Panic threatens to overwhelm you, but you fight it down. You collapse onto your bunk, exhausted, dirty, your armor heavy and uncomfortable. You peel off your helmet and let it clatter to the floor. You need a hot bath, clean clothes, a good night's sleep. You hear the sound of a lute playing a mournful tune somewhere in the fort. You close your eyes, trying to picture the face of your homeland. Did you ever really belong here in this foreign place, serving an emperor you have never seen? Or does the wall hold your fate, keeping you trapped within its stony grasp forever? Fear is your enemy here on the wall. You are a soldier, trained to face danger head-on. You and the others grab your weapons and rush toward the gate. As you round the corner, you see a group of men emerging from the forest, their faces hidden behind shields. They are armed with bows and arrows and short swords. In their midst is a litter bearing the still form of your comrade. The leader strides forward, his eyes blazing with defiance. He raises his sword and shouts something in a language you don't understand. One of your comrades steps forward, his own weapon raised. The two men exchange angry words, their voices rising above the din of battle. The leader gestures toward the litter, his meaning clear. He wants a parley. You strain to make out what lies ahead. After what seems like hours, the figure grows closer, revealing itself as a young civilian. Once there, you leave him under the care of the medic. You return to the gate, where the fighting rages. Swords clash, shields bang against one another, and men cry out, wounded or dying. In the heat of the moment, strategy flies out the window. You strike blindly, fueled only by rage and fear. As suddenly as it began, the battle ends. The attackers lie slain at your feet, their weapons clattering to the ground. The leader, mortally wounded, slowly backs away. You raise your sword, ready to finish him off, but he collapses before you, his eyes wide with surprise. You lower your weapon, unsure what to do next. A hush falls over the courtyard. You can hear the soft thud of bodies hitting the ground, the gasps of the wounded. You stare down at the dead man, his face is twisted in a silent scream. Blood pools around him, staining the ground a dark crimson. It's a grim reminder of the cost of war, is soaked to the bone, his cloak pulled tight against the wind. He raises a hand in greeting, shouts something you cannot hear. You raise your own hand in response, and he turns and disappears over the horizon. Just another traveler seeking shelter from the storm, you think, relieved that it's not an enemy. Each man serves himself, then falls silent as he eats. You hear the soft scrape of spoons against earthenware, the occasional grunt or sigh. You take a bite of porridge, its bland taste a comfort. Then you notice a glint of sunlight on the ramparts, signaling the arrival of fresh recruits. You can feel the cold water seeping into your skin, even through your sturdy leather boots. You know they're soaked through. The veterans at the tables fall silent as the newcomers pass by. Among them, you see one familiar face. Titus, who enlisted 2 years ago, is back after recovering from wounds. You nod to him, surprised by a sudden surge of warmth. Titus returns the gesture with a tired smile, then joins the other new arrivals at a vacant table. Curiosity tugs at you, but there's no time for gossip. You have a busy day ahead. This is Hadrian's Wall, a long line of stone and earth that marks the boundary between the Roman Empire and the unknown wilderness beyond. He is a veteran of countless campaigns, his face a roadmap of old injuries. His keen eyes miss nothing. He briefs you and the other soldiers on today's assignments. There will be patrols along the wall and a training exercise in the courtyard after lunch. Any sign of trouble, you are to report to him immediately. He gives you a final look. You sense his authority, his readiness to punish any slacker or shirker. With a curt nod, he dismisses you. 9 years ago, when you enlisted, you were merely a young auxiliary soldier, a recruit from one of the many tribes Rome has conquered. Here you and several others will stand guard, scanning the horizon for signs of danger. As you ascend the ramparts, you can feel the wind whipping at your cloak, carrying with it the scent of rain and the cries of seabirds. From this height, you can see for miles across the flat landscape a patchwork quilt of green fields and dark forests. In the distance, the North Sea shimmers like a sheet of silver. But there is no time to admire the view. You post yourself at the edge of the wall, pulling your cloak tighter against the wind. You had been promised pay, food, and shelter in exchange for years of service. But your wages are often late and your rations are thin and unvarying. Today, like most others, you will eat breakfast of barley mush and salted fish. The food smells sharp and salty, barely masking the dampness that clings to your clothes and skin. You join the other men of your cohort, moving silently through the courtyard. In the center, the barracks are crowded, stuffy, and dark. Even the rain seems to fall harder now, drumming a tattoo on the roof. A chill wind whips through the cracks in the walls, sending shivers down your spine. Pulling your tunic tight, you step out into the courtyard. The sound of hammers echoes from the smithy. 2 soldiers approach, their arms laden with newly sharpened spears and swords. A third carries a heavy pot on his head, its contents sloshing precariously. In the distance, you see the cook setting up the evening meal for the evening meal. Already the sharp temps of roasting meat mingles with the smell of wood smoke. You straighten your shoulders, your jaw tightening, right? For a moment, you consider running away, disappearing into the mists of Britain. Why do you serve here? What hope can you have of seeing home again? What did Rome give you that was worth throwing away the freedom that is yours by birthright? Sleep still clings to the men like the morning mist. Some rouse themselves to haul up their beds and stretch their stiff limbs. Others remain curled beneath their blankets, muttering in their sleep. The occasional snore echoes through the barracks, competing with the drumming of rain on the thatched roof. All around you, men go about their morning routines, each lost in his own thoughts. As you shave, you glance at the chipped marble bust of Caesar Hadrian that sits on a nearby table. He looks stern, severe. Still, you are a soldier. And a soldier doesn't run from danger, even if it means staying at your post. A group of 5 men enters the courtyard, their faces pale and drawn, their steps uncertain. After breakfast, you report to the officer in charge of the second cohort. You join the rest of your cohort, making your way to the main gate, where a rampart leads to the top of the wall. In the distance, you think you see movement, perhaps a lone horseman riding toward you from the east. Suddenly, the tranquility is shattered. A blood-curdling scream pierces the air. Alaric, that was the scout you replaced on the morning watch. You help carry the body of your fallen comrade to the nearest oven. Later, after tending to the wounded and burying the dead, you return to the barracks. Hello, my friends. Let's try something new. I have prepared 7 sentences for you today, each describing a significant moment in British history. Your task is to put them in the correct order. The correct sequence is D, C, F, B, A, E, G. How did you do? If you got them all right, you win nothing except the warm glow of smug satisfaction. But so far, it hasn't been easy. From your post on the North Coast, you've heard rumors sweeping through the camp. I hope everyone enjoyed our little history quiz at the beginning of this episode. Hopefully, it made you think about how long and rich British history really is, said his wife Boadicea, and that his daughter would marry the Roman governor's son. However, this was Roman Britain, and the Roman governor was more interested in grabbing all of the Iceni, gold for himself, than upholding the last king's wishes. It's worth noting that estimates of the size of Boudicca's army vary wildly depending on the source. She and her warriors traveled throughout the province, burning settlements and killing all of the Romans they came across. Her first target was Camulodunum, now Colchester, the capital of Roman Britain. This city, home to many freed slaves and wealthy merchants, was seen as a symbol of Roman oppression. Boudicca and her followers stormed the city, executing all of the male inhabitants who had collaborated with the Romans and enslaving the women and children. What did you think of her story? You know of any other badass queens we should write about? Why not let us know in the comments section below? Also, don't forget to subscribe for more awesome historical tales. Thanks for watching. Next, she moved on to Londinium, now London, another important commercial center. Here, Boudicca's forces wreaked havoc, slaughtering the residents and destroying their property. The town of Arulamayum, now St. Albans, suffered a similar fate. The Roman historian Cassius Dio claimed it was over 100,000 strong. Suetonius Paulinus, the governor of Britain, tried to assemble troops to put down the rebellion, but he was hampered by the fact that many of his soldiers had been lured away by promises of plunder in the cities. Many rebel leaders were executed or exiled, and their supporters faced reprisals. At the same time, the Romans worked to tighten their control over the province, implementing measures to suppress any further dissent. This included the construction of additional forts and military bases, as well as the stationing of more troops in the region. These actions aimed to restore stability and security to Roman Britain, but they also marked a turning point in the relationship between the Roman Empire and the native Britons. The rebellion had exposed the depth of resentment and opposition to Roman rule, and the subsequent crackdown only served to deepen the divide between the two cultures. The seeds of future conflicts had been sown, and the struggle for dominance in Britannia was far from over. Meanwhile, Boudica continued her rampage, pillaging throughout the countryside, gathering more followers to her cause, while the more modern historian Geoffrey of Monmouth wrote that it was only 2,000 either way. Her army consisted of members from numerous different tribes. Despite being outnumbered, the Romans were victorious, crushing the rebellion and killing or capturing its leaders. The sources disagree over what happened to Boudica after the battle. Cassius Dio claimed that she took her own life rather than be taken prisoner, but other accounts suggest that she may have been executed by the Romans. Regardless, the rebellion was put down, and peace returned to the province, at least for a while. United under her banner in opposition to Roman domination. But the humiliation didn't stop there. Not only did the governor ignore the will, but he also brazenly assaulted Boudica and her daughters, subjecting them to sexual abuse and whipping. So yeah, given all that, it's understandable that Boudica wasn't exactly pro-Roman. So, as always, a big thanks to everyone who subscribed to the channel, and a special thanks to those who support us directly. Instead, she chose to lead a rebellion, gathering together the Britons from all over the island to fight back against the Roman invaders. And her call to arms resonated with many. As we can tell from the writings of the Roman historian Cassius Dio, the locals absolutely hated Roman rule. There were several reasons for this. First, there was a stark contrast between the culture and traditions of the Roman Empire and those of the native Britons. Many Romans looked down on the British people as uncivilized and barbaric. Second, the Roman occupation had led to a great deal of suffering among the native tribes. They had endured brutal subjugation, exploitation, and displacement. Third, the Romans' religious practices were anathema to the Celtic polytheism of the British people. Finally, there was the issue of slavery. The Roman Empire had forcibly enslaved many Britons, tearing families apart and denying them basic human rights. All of this created a climate of resentment and opposition to Roman authority, making Boudica's call for rebellion all the more compelling. You're the best. Now, if you want to find out more about history's most badass queens, why don't you check out the series in the description below? Talk of burning villages and ambushes, of entire legions lost to the thick forests. But personally, you haven't seen much action. That is, until today. Specifically, we'll be looking at Boudica, a warrior queen from the Celtic tribe of the Iceni. To understand Boudica's story, though, we need to talk about her husband, Prasutagus, king of the Iceni. He ruled over the kingdom of Norfolk, an area known to the Romans as the Kingdom of the Iceni. Unlike many of his fellow British tribesmen, Prasutagus had chosen to coexist peacefully with the Roman occupation. Not only that, but he'd also formed an alliance with Rome, allowing Roman merchants access to the riches of East Anglia and receiving Roman support in his wars against neighboring tribes. In fact, after defeating the Trinovantes tribe in battle, Prasutagus even relocated their king to Norfolk. Overall, his strategy seemed to be working. His kingdom flourished. He had a loyal Roman ally, and he was able to maintain his traditional lifestyle. You and your comrades are dispatched to investigate the source of some disturbances along the coast. Is it just a group of unruly natives or something more sinister? As you make your way to the troubled area, you pass a small village. It looks peaceful enough. But as you approach, you notice a few unsettling details. Some huts are destroyed, livestock is scattered, and a chill wind whistles through the empty streets. Suddenly, one of your men lets out a shout. He has found something that chills him to the bone. Buried beneath the ground is a collection of crosses, each bearing grim witness to the brutality of war. Even the bravest of Roman soldiers cannot help but feel a sense of foreboding. What horrors have unfolded here? Who were these people? What does it mean for the battles yet to come? With heavy hearts, you and your companions continue on, determined to uncover the truth behind the disturbances. If you got one wrong, you get an A for effort. And if you got two or more wrong, I invite you to watch this episode again. As you listen to each sentence, if you think you know the answer, please write down the corresponding letter. Imagine now the distant lands beyond your cold, muddy fort. The forests and hills where native tribes live, watching the slow advance of Roman power. Among them is a woman named Boudica Queen, a mother, and soon, a figure who will shake the very foundations of the empire. Boudica's story begins not with battle, but with loss and grievance. Her husband, the king of the Iceni tribe, had maintained a careful peace with Rome, but when he died, Roman officials seized his lands and insulted Boudica herself, humiliating her and her daughters. This was no mere personal slight. It was a spark in a tinderbox of tensions between the occupiers and the conquered. One day, the simmering anger erupted into rebellion. Boudica rallied tribes across the region, uniting those who longed for freedom from Roman rule. Army marched toward Roman towns, Camulodunum, Londinium, Verulamium, places once proud, now to be engulfed in flames. The destruction was swift and devastating. Roman governors fled or were killed. The streets ran with chaos and fear. Legions scrambled to respond, but the revolt caught them unprepared. Yet even in such fiery rebellion, there was a beginning and an end marked by weariness and uncertainty. The tribes, many of them poorly armed and trained compared to Roman soldiers, faced shortages and internal strains. The rebellion, like a wildfire, burned hot but briefly. Boudica's final battle was fierce, but it ended in defeat. The empire's forces crushed the uprising, scattering the rebels and restoring the cold order to the land. Boudica herself vanished from the records. Some say she took her own life to avoid capture. Her revolt became legend, a symbol of resistance whispered across the centuries. For you standing guard at the distant fort, her story is a reminder of the fragile peace you maintain, and the unrest that simmers just beyond the horizon. At the end, we'll reveal the correct sequence. Here's your first sentence. In 1911, George King, son of Edward, became the King of Great Britain and Ireland. Next sentence. During the First World War, the United Kingdom suffered heavy losses in manpower and resources. Ready? Here's the third sentence. In 1940, Britain stood alone against the might of Nazi Germany after the British Expeditionary Force narrowly escaped from the beaches of Dunkirk. Fourth sentence. In 1939, Great Britain and Ireland declared war on Germany, joining the fight against fascism. Fifth sentence. After centuries of hardship and civil war in 1660, England emerged victorious from the conflict known as the English Civil War, with Oliver Cromwell dead. Next sentence. In 874, Egbert of Wessex defeated the invading Danes at the Battle of Edington, establishing the dominance of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms over the Danelaw. Last sentence. Following the invasion of Poland by Germany, Britain and Poland signed an alliance treaty. Now, let's check your answers. As for me, it is time to take up my post as a lowly Roman soldier stationed on the frigid northern frontier of Britannia. The year is 43 AD. You are a humble Roman soldier, one among thousands who have come to Britannia to help subdue the savage natives. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. But now it's time to return to Britannia, which will become part of the Roman Empire around 400 years before the birth of Christ. Then he died. But upon his death, his will stipulated that his wealth should be divided equally between him. And while she could have icily sat back and accepted her fate, that's not what she did. She quickly raised a huge army, which historians estimate numbered somewhere between 60 and 100,000 warriors. Once her army was large enough, Boudica set out to punish the Romans who had wronged her and her people. These attacks created panic among the Roman authorities, who realized the gravity of the situation. After months of fighting, Suetonius finally managed to raise an army and confronted Boudica's forces near the river Medway. In the aftermath of the rebellion, Roman authorities sought to punish those involved and prevent future uprisings. So there we have it, the incredible story of Boudica, a warrior queen who fought against the Roman Empire and whose name has echoed through the ages. This is a history of waiting. Welcome to the second episode of our series exploring the history of the Roman army. Last time we talked about what it was like to join the army, how your life changed, and how your career progressed. You arrived here 2 years ago with your legion, having marched from your base in Pannonia. Your initial training complete. You are now ready to do your primary duty. Defend the province from the various tribes living beyond the Great Wall, built here by the Emperor Hadrian. Reading them aloud to your bunkmates is a favorite pastime, and you take turns doing it each night. When the long winter nights settle in, you gather together with your comrades and tell stories, play games, drink wine, and try to forget the cold and the endless drizzle. Dice clack as you play a drinking game, then you tell ghost stories and jokes and sing songs about your deeds of valor. Quickly you grab your shield and sword and run to the gate. Everyone gets a tunic or a blanket or a vase. You trade with your friends, getting the things you really want. As the year passes, the centurion organizes parties and feasts, celebrating victories and punishing traitors. What would you do if you were a Roman soldier stationed in Britain? Let us know in the comments below. And if you liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. It helps us a lot. Thanks for watching. See you next time. He maintains discipline, but he's fair. The long winter passes slowly, and finally the spring thaws the ground, and the mud dries into dust. Life is peaceful again, and the Legion prepares for the summer campaign. The rest of your cohort is already there, lining up to meet the coming attack. The officers whisper among themselves, but no one knows anything. Nothing interesting ever happens here, but that's also your job. You exist on the frontier to prevent events from happening. It's not glorious, but it's necessary. You are here on the edge of the world, a tiny flicker of civilization in a vast sea of wilderness. As you look out over the barren landscape, you feel very small, very insignificant. You feel the weight of the entire empire pressing down on you, expecting you to hold the line no matter what. It's lonely here. There's no one for miles. It's silent here. It's only the wind whispers, tales of forgotten battles. It's empty here. No invaders have come today, but that doesn't mean they won't come tomorrow. But as you stand here, a sense of peace settles over you. This is your post, your duty, your life. And for now, that's enough. Could the reports of unrest in the provinces be true? Will your legion be sent away from the wall? If so, where will you go next? Will you be fighting fierce enemies or enduring long marches? Perhaps both. Still, someone has to hold the fort. It's your job. Stand in the courtyard, the wind whipping around you, and imagine the Legion marching away without you. You wonder if you'll ever see them again. You hope they'll be back soon. And as the sun sets, you shiver, pull your thin cloak tighter, and keep watch. You don't really want to fight, but you will if you must. Soon the attackers are upon you. Swords clash against swords and shields clatter against shields. The noise is deafening. The dust is thick, and soon you are exhausted. The victory is complete. The bodies of the dead are dragged away, and the spoils are collected. There's loot for everyone. Music echoes through the barrack blocks, and laughter rings out until the hour before dawn. A quick dinner of bread and cheese, then it's back to work. You keep busy during the day, drilling, training, building, fixing, working. You rarely have free time. But you find small moments of joy, like when the baker's oven warms your hands and face, or when the new batch of vinegar and oil makes your ration of bread taste a bit like home. Sometimes you find coins in the latrine or an old tunic in the ditch, and whenever you have a spare moment, you polish your armor. After all, it's the best way to pass the time. It's the highlight of your week, these brief glimpses into the world outside the fort. The ink is still wet on these fragile pieces of wood, which are carefully stored away after being read. You miss your family and friends, too. You write letters to them every chance you get, and you hope they arrive safely, even if it takes months for your words to reach your loved ones. You write about life here, about the constant rain and wind, about the dreary work and your hopes for leaving this God-forsaken place. And you ask for warm clothes and good food, and you remind them to send extra socks. Not that there's much action around here. The locals know better than to mess with Rome. In fact, it's been so peaceful for the past decade that rumors are swirling about your legion being shipped off to fight in some faraway province. Fresh faces arrive, and there's always something interesting to see in the column of supply wagons. If you're lucky, a detachment from Rome comes to inspect the fort, and you get to show off how sharp you are. Or maybe some VIPs need to pass through the area, and you get to see a senator, or even an emperor. But the long waits are the worst. You stand guard or sit by the fire, eating stale bread and listening to the wind whistle through the empty corridors of the fort. It seems like nothing ever happens here. It's boring, it's monotonous, it's miserable. But until then, you live here at the Fort of Vindolanda. It's time we're going to explore life on the job, but if you haven't seen episode 1 yet, check it out before watching this one so you don't miss any of the information. You are a Roman soldier, part of the Legio Secunda Augusta, stationed along the northern frontier of the Empire in Britannia. Your century shares a large barrack block with 3 other centuries from your cohort. Each room is cramped and dark, barely big enough for all of you to fit in when you not on patrol or doing drills. You can just about make out the shapes of your bunkmates as they sleep. There's little else to see, though. Things are kept neat, even Spartan, unlike the luxurious villas of the rich back in Italy. It's a hard bed and simple rations. For most of your waking hours, you leave the fort, patrolling the wall or keeping watch at the gate. And when you're not on duty, you're training. Most of the year, the weather is miserable, so you spend many hours throwing the spear or practicing sword drills inside the fort's courtyard. Sometimes there's a lecture or an engineering project, like repairing a section of the wall. When the weather clears, though, you get to ride out onto the open moor with the cavalry or hike into the hills to chase down bandits. And there are always newcomers arriving at the fort, fresh recruits who need to be taught the ropes. When you're lucky, the courier arrives bearing letters from home. There's more to life than writing, eating, and fighting. The routine is broken occasionally. Supplies arrive from the rear, bringing news from the outside world. And then, without warning, the quiet is shattered. The messenger arrives in a panic. Raiders are approaching the wall. Life at the fort returns to normal. You process the plunder. The commander is gone. That's never a good sign. The fort is eerily quiet without him. Where is he? Why isn't he here? As a soldier, you endure. That's your job. So what do you think? The roar of the crowd, the clash of swords, the thrill of the chase, the roar of lions, the stench of blood. This was Rome's entertainment, her bread and circuses. For centuries, people have come to Rome to see gladiators fight to the death, to watch men and beasts battle for dominance, and to witness staged battles that mimic the triumphs and tragedies of war. As an influential member of society, he must maintain a certain decorum. While he reclines on a couch discussing philosophy or politics with friends, he knows there are eyes watching him, waiting for him to slip so they can deal him a fatal blow. Power in this world is a delicate balance, a constant game of one-upmanship. He can never let his guard down completely, because the next emperor may turn against him. Servants bring in platters piled high with olives, cheese, and cured meats, followed by courses of seafood, fowl, and lamb, each more succulent than the last. His days are filled with leisure and luxury, his nights with entertainment and ease. He greets friends and acquaintances, exchanging pleasantries and gossip. He might discuss the latest play or gladiator match, lament the state of Roman morals, or debate the merits of the new emperor's policies. He takes a dip in the pool, has his hair cut, and enjoys a massage. Life is good. Everyone wants a piece of the action. Everyone wants a word with the powerful landowner. He reclines on a couch, sipping wine and watching the flames dance. Another day is over, another victory claimed. What more could he ask for? He listens patiently, dispensing advice and favors as he sees fit. Fear is a tool wielded by your superiors to keep you sharp, to ensure you never let your guard down. Love and family ties are anchors that hold you back, luxuries you can ill afford. The Legion is your new family, your brothers in arms, your fellow sufferers. Rest and relaxation are forbidden luxuries. Leisure time is spent sharpening weapons, mending armor, and preparing for the next assignment. The camaraderie forged in the crucible of shared hardship is a potent elixir. Plunder is the carrot that dangled before you, the promise of wealth and glory, the hope of a better life. For many, it's the only incentive to endure the horrors of life in the exilia, the promise of riches to ease the ache of endless toil. Let me know in the comments who you think said that. The sense of belonging to something larger than yourself. A cog in the mighty machine of Rome's defense offers a strange solace. When the Legion marches, you march as one, a single organism driven by a singular purpose. The rhythm of marching, the cadence of commands, the solidarity of shared hardship, these are the constants in your life. Entertainment is a rare treat, often consisting of dice games, drinking bouts, and whispered stories around flickering campfires. Outside, the wind howls and rain lashes against the canvas, mimicking the turmoil in your gut. You yearn for the warmth of hearth and family, the comfort of a familiar bed, the taste of home-cooked food. But duty calls, and you wouldn't trade your place in the Legion for all the luxuries in Rome. You are a soldier of Rome, and Rome is your mistress, demanding your unwavering loyalty and sacrifice. The familiar smell of stale waste and unwashed bodies surrounds you. Comfort is a foreign concept here, a luxury you can't afford. Duty is your only companion, a harsh taskmaster that demands obedience without question. He's the head of the snake, the most important person in this part of the empire. You've mended it countless times, but the fabric is worn thin, offering little protection from the elements or lurking dangers. Your helmet, dented and scratched, bears the scars of countless battles, a testament to the perils you've faced and survived. Each dent and scratch a reminder of the deafening roar of battle, the metallic temps of blood, and the chilling sight of fallen comrades. People come to him to get things done, to further their own interests, to advance their own careers. Every waking moment is consumed by military routines and rituals. From the moment you rise to the haunting strains of the first watch call, your actions are governed by duty and discipline. Training, drills, and patrols leave you physically and mentally drained. Even sleep offers little respite, invaded by nightmares of past battles and the haunting specters of fallen comrades. He's the gatekeeper to power, wealth, and influence, and everyone wants something from him. He wakes in a luxurious bedroom, cared for by slaves, dines on delicacies from across the empire, and entertains guests with imported wine. Danger comes not from the elements or wild beasts, but from rivals and jealous peers.
Death.
And death is as sudden and unexpected as a scorpion's sting. After dinner, men retire to the atrium to play games and drink wine, while women gather in the peristyle to gossip and weave. Music fills the air, mingling with the scent of roses and jasmine. It's a pleasant way to end the day. In this world of luxury and intrigue, one wrong move can send a man to the gallows. He dines according to custom, drinks the correct wine, and dresses in the latest fashions. He attends public events and participates in civic duties when necessary, though he'd prefer to spend all his time at the villa. It's not the blood and violence that fascinates him, but the spectacle itself, the display of power and control. To him, the games are just another form of entertainment, like watching a play or listening to a poet. He enjoys the thrill of the chase, the taste of victory, the satisfaction of conquest. It's all just a game to him. It's his private sanctuary, a place where he can relax and enjoy the fruits of his labor. Unlike the soldiers on the frontier, he doesn't need to worry about raids or ambushes. The nearest threat comes from rival landowners and jealous aristocrats. The Colosseum stands as a testament to the might and extravagance of the Roman Empire, drawing visitors from all over the ancient world. But just a short journey from the muddy, rain-soaked frontier forts lies a very different world. His meals are rich, roasted meats, fresh bread, olives, and fruits brought from distant regions of the empire. There's nothing like watching fierce warriors fight to the death or seeing chariots thunder around the track. These are the diversions that make life bearable in this stifling world of privilege and decorum. Fresh fish from the coast, honey from the south, spices from the east, all brought to his table by those who labor under the scorching sun. While he feasts, children pick up grapes in the fields, gather olives, trim hedges, and weed the garden. Women sort fruit, brew wine, and prepare meals. Men mend nets, harness horses, and repair tools. They work from sunrise to sunset to keep the wheels of the estate turning smoothly. A place where the comforts of home are never far away, where baths are always hot and wine is always chilled. You don't know what mud and rain feel like. Life here is about enjoying yourself, about appreciating the finer things while sipping imported wine. The villa's owner, a wealthy Roman official or landowner, spends his days far from the mud and monotony of the border. He writes poetry, entertains guests, and enjoys the spoils of his labor. He hosts banquets with imported wine, couches, perfumes, and delicacies from distant provinces. Slaves wait on him hand and foot, serving him the finest food and drink. There's no shortage of anything. He has enough money to buy whatever he wants, whenever he wants it. And the provincial governors and imperial officials eager for his favor make sure his needs are met. Where work is a game of chance rather than necessity, and where danger comes not from raiders or wild beasts, but from poisonous gossip and the fickle whims of emperors. Imagine stepping into a sprawling Roman villa, nestled on gently rolling hills with terraced gardens and neatly trimmed hedges. Here, the air is scented with olive oil, fresh-baked bread, and blooming flowers. Stone columns rise gracefully, supporting cool porticos that offer refuge from the sun's heat. Inside, the floors are heated, a luxury unheard of in the damp frontier outposts. Walls are painted with frescoes depicting mythological scenes and verdant landscapes. Soft cushions and fine fabrics provide comfort where you once had only rough tunics. Here you refar from the complaints of auxiliary soldiers stuck for months at a time in dreary fortresses along the empire's fringes. His life isn't all pleasure. In this world of wine and roses, whispers can be as sharp as swords and envy as deadly as poison. While you trudge through rain and mud, he reclines on a couch discussing philosophy or politics with friends. Evenings bring new pleasures, such as chariot races at the circus or gladiator contests at the amphitheater. As the sun dips below the horizon, the sky blazes with vibrant hues of orange, red, and purple. It's time for dinner. This is the life of a Roman aristocrat. He walks through the bustling forum, the center of Roman life, where merchants hawk their wares and politicians debate the latest scandal. At the gladiator games, he watches with detached amusement as men and beasts fight to the death. When the hunt is over, he returns to his villa to relax and unwind. You awoke before dawn in your tent at the edge of the empire. Your uniform, once a symbol of Roman might, now hangs in tattered rags from your weary frame. The Legion is your world.
Ow.
Danger is a constant companion. The threat of marauders, wild beasts, and the elements looms over every activity, every step you take. Women are a distant memory, their presence a fading dream from the days before you were swallowed whole by the unforgiving maw of your duty. Yet despite the hardships, there are moments of pride. And then there's the plunder, the spoils of battle, the tangible rewards of your sacrifices, the chance to enrich yourself amidst the ruin you help create. At night, as you huddle around a small fire, sharing meager rations with your comrades, you dream of home. There's a quote from a famous historian that goes, "He who controls the present controls the past." So, what have we uncovered? You, the auxiliary soldier, were not just a name lost to time. We're a thread in the grand tapestry of the Roman Empire, fraying at the edges, often overlooked, but essential nonetheless. Your daily life was far from glorious. The mud, the boredom, the constant discomfort. It wasn't the Rome of marble statues and golden laurel wreaths. It was the Rome of wooden palisades, soggy tunics, and endless watches. You stood between civilization and what lay beyond. Barbarians, forests, and the unknown. And in return, maybe, just maybe, Roman citizenship and a plot of land. If you survived, you often imagine empires through their emperors and senators, their triumphs and monuments. But history isn't only made by marble and gold. It's made by men with worn boots, splintered spears, and calloused hands. Your life might not have been celebrated with parades. But without you, the rain-drenched, underpaid, half-forgotten auxiliary, the empire's borders would have crumbled long before the history books were written. So tonight, as the soft music fades and the flickering candle dims, spare a quiet thought for those who served on the edge of the known world, and rest well. Even history's forgotten soldiers deserve peace. Tonight, we journey far from the clamor of cities and the weight of empires. Step into the soft, worn sandals of someone who chose, or was chosen, to walk a quieter path. A path of stone and silence, of discipline, of surrender. A path through moss-covered courtyards, beneath cedar trees heavy with mist. In a temple tucked into the folds of 13th century Japan. You won't hear crowds here. No merchants shouting prices, no metal striking metal. Only the brush of a broom across old flagstones, the wooden clack of prayer beads. The rustle of robes as a line of monks bows low to greet the morning. The life of a Zen Buddhist monk in medieval Japan was not what most would imagine. There was peace, yes, but it was the kind earned through repetition, discomfort, and unflinching commitment. As the stars slowly fade from your sky tonight, allow yourself to drift, not towards sleep just yet, but towards stillness. Toward the echo of footsteps in a quiet monastery. We begin, not with tea. Welcome to my channel. Today we'll visit Japan and explore what life would be like if you became a monk at a historic temple. Waking up at 4 a.m. is standard for many people in Japan. And soon the sky above the mountains will glow with the first light of dawn. But inside your shared quarters, the temperature is still quite low. Your breath hangs in the air like a pale ghost as you sweep the courtyard, sweeping away fallen leaves and bits of gravel. This is the only sound you'll hear for the next few hours. This is practice. It's a silent world, a world of routines and rituals. After cleaning your wooden bowl with a pickled radish, no food is wasted. Sometimes you work in the sutra hall, copying Buddhist texts by hand. The ink bottle is always full, the brush always clean. Each stroke of your brush must be perfect, not smudged nor rushed. Blending into the page, the characters seem to flow from your pen. It's a peaceful rhythm, blending past and present, tradition and creation. There is no one to impress. There is no need to hurry. When you finish, you bow. You chant sutras, your voice is low and steady, rising and falling like waves on a calm sea. It's not music. It's not a prayer. It's a steady rhythm anchoring you to the present. Then you wait, perhaps for chores or study, perhaps for more meditation. Rest is what you crave, but sleep is not allowed. Day after day you follow this path. You rise before dawn, you chant before the sun paints the sky. Check out the video, What Life Would Be Like If You Were a Woman in Feudal Japan. You can click the link on the screen now. Don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss an exciting episode. Thanks for watching. You eat rice for every meal, finding peace in the simplicity. You study scriptures, memorizing words that guide your soul. You meditate, seeking stillness in the midst of chaos. You work in silence, finding joy in tasks well done. You sleep on hard floors, embracing discomfort as a teacher. You sit zazen until drowsiness overtakes you. Even in sleep, you must be mindful, dreaming dreams that are empty of desire, free of attachment. Each day is also unique, offering new lessons, new insights. It's a life of solitude, yet you're surrounded by brothers in spirit. It's a life of simplicity, yet you're engaged in the complexities of existence. It's a life of quiet beauty, where every moment is a step towards enlightenment. The wood of the building breathes the chill into your clothes, seeping deep into your fingers. The rhythm of the cosmos, the chant of the ages, the taste of humble rice, the sting of winter's bite, the solace of shared silence, the weight of ancient scrolls, the dance of falling leaves, the quiet strength of weathered hands, the vastness of scripture, the stillness of snowy mornings, the warmth of shared purpose, the echo of wooden paddles, the pulse of life renewed each dawn. This is your path, the path of the monk. The brazier is cold, its fire having long since given way to the night. This is the reality you've chosen. You're expected to memorize long passages, committing them to heart and memory. Though there are no tests and no grades, there is an infinite exam waiting. This, too, requires great patience and precision. The moss must be kept free of debris, its borders neat, its tones uniform. This time, your knees are locked, your legs straight out in front of you, your thighs burn, and your back stiffens. The head monk walks among you, tapping shoulders with his paddle, urging you to maintain your posture. When your legs threaten to buckle, you draw strength from within, focusing on your breath, anchoring you to the present. The sound of your tools echoes softly in the stillness, blending with the rustle of leaves. Hours pass like this. You may have a chance to rest in the shade, sipping tea with fellow monks. There is no small talk. There's no complaints about the heat or weariness. You rest quietly, gathering strength for the afternoon. You don't speak to your fellow monks, but not because of any disagreement or discord. It's simply that speaking is not needed. There's no gossip or idle chatter. Once more, you eat in silence. After cleaning your bowl, you return to the hall to await the evening bell. You get up quietly, fold your sleeping mat, and kneel to bow toward the altar. You feel the pressure on your knees, the strain on your back. You might prefer to be curled up in a warm bed, but this is what you've chosen. You keep your spine straight and your gaze lowered, focused on the floor in front of you. Some might call this meditation, but really it's zazen, seated meditation. For an hour, you sit like this, motionless, breathing deeply, trying to quiet your thoughts. The first sound you make is the soft chime of the wake-up bell. It's not loud, just gentle, like a nudge to start the day. A novice monk must ring this bell daily, striking it until the sound fills the meditation hall. The sound itself is muted, like all sound in a monastery should be, for speech and noise have no place here. You rise a little stiffer than you'd like and exit into the chilly morning. Soon you're kneeling again, sitting with legs folded tightly under your body. If your posture falters, the head monk will strike your shoulder with a wooden paddle. He does it not to hurt you, but because he wants you to focus, to return to the present moment, here and now. Time passes slowly. The minutes tick by like the seconds. Finally, the head monk rings a bell and you stir. It's time to move again. Breakfast is simple, just rice. Sometimes it's cold by the time you eat it, but you eat every grain. The sun climbs higher as the work continues, as does the quiet routine of the day. Other days you may find yourself in the garden, not cultivating crops, but carefully tending to patches of moss. In the afternoon, you may find yourself back in the meditation hall. When the midday sun beats down, the pace slows. After a brief rest, you return to study, poring over ancient texts. In the late afternoon, dinner is served. Again, it's simple, usually just rice and perhaps some pickled vegetables. As twilight falls, you gather in the meditation hall. A single candle flickers, casting dancing shadows on the walls. After the chanting, you return to your quarters. The night is cool. The tatami mats springy beneath your feet. Waking in the early hours, you find yourself drawn back into the cycle, back to the quiet embrace of the monastery. Each day is much like the last, a gentle reminder of what truly matters. This is what life would be like if you became a monk at a historic Japanese temple. Are you ready to take the first step? What's next? Why don't you watch another video right now? Are you curious about what life was like for samurai women? The year is 1860, and you have just passed the imperial examinations, the highest academic exams in all of China. You are now officially a member of the literati class. Your future is bright, or so you think. In reality, the real test has just begun. Welcome to my channel. Today we talk about what happens after you pass the civil service exam in ancient China. This means you'll be able to get your salary every month, and will also receive gifts of silk and hemp. You see, after passing the imperial examinations, many graduates would find themselves part of a special program known as the Imperial Scholar Program, or the Shujishi. In this program, graduates were allowed to live luxurious lives while studying under an elder scholar for a few years. However, this was a highly competitive program, and only those who took first place in their respective provincial exams would stand a chance of being accepted. To help us out, we'll use a passage from the records of the Grand Historian, written by Sui Makion during the early Western Han Dynasty. The workday begins at the 5th watch of the night, which is equivalent to midnight in our calendar. This means that the workday is at least 14 hours long, which is a lot of time spent in the office. As we mentioned earlier, there are 9 ranks in the bureaucracy, but all of them are divided into 2 levels, upper and lower. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up button and share it with a friend. Subscribe for more content. As always, thanks for watching. It means that there are 18 steps in total on the bureaucratic ladder. It also means that promotion opportunities are rather limited, since there is no real way to skip ahead. If you're a lower-ranking official, the best you can hope for is to get promoted to the next level within the same rank. Getting promoted beyond that is nearly impossible unless there is a major political upheaval or an influx of new jobs. The truth is, the majority of Chinese bureaucrats never moved up in rank and spent their entire careers in the same position. This is because promotions depended on so many factors outside of your control. For example, the death rate among senior officials was quite high due to overwork, stress, and bad diets. This meant that a lot of positions were left open, and lower-ranking officials were able to move up without needing to outperform their peers. However, That's only if you were in the right place at the right time. Otherwise, you might spend your entire career working in a mountain village measuring grain stores, recording livestock counts, supervising the repair of dikes, and auditing tax scrolls by candlelight. ULL also noticed that there is a lot of downtime where officials do nothing but wait for their superiors to finish their business. This might not sound like fun, but keep in mind that these officials are in charge of writing all of the documents used by the emperor and his court. Everything from letters to decrees to proclamations. This means that there is a lot of time required to craft the perfect wording for each sentence. The quality of these documents reflects directly on the author, so mistakes are simply not allowed. It reads, "Officials who hold public office have regular hours. At the 5th watch of the night, the drum beats for those on duty. In the courts, those on duty attend to their business. At the 6th watch, they shave, wash their hands and face, put on their robes and ornaments, and go to court. When the magistrates enter, the junior officials stand up. When they sit down, the junior officials sit down. When the magistrates go out, the junior officials follow along. When they return, the junior officials stand up and they go on with their business. Since most of you probably aren't the top scholar in your province, you won't have this luxury. Instead, you'll probably be thrown into the deep end as soon as you pass the test." This was considered rude and disrespectful to the ancestors of the dynasty, whose spirits resided in the scrolls stored in the office. This meant that you had to pack food and eat outside of the office or in a designated dining hall. Also, despite the stereotype of the Chinese bureaucrat as a tea-sipping calligrapher, most officials were too busy to take up painting or poetry as a hobby. Once you've got all your paperwork in order, you can depart for your new station. When you arrive at your posting, you will need to do the following: pay court to the local dignitaries, take up your quarters, inspect the offices, study the records, assess the staff, and make plans for the coming year. From there, it's pretty much business as usual. If you'd like us to make videos about other historical professions, let us know in the comments below. So once you've passed the imperial examination, the next step is for you to be assigned a position within the bureaucracy. These were men who passed the imperial examinations but remained in the capital city, didn't leave until they secured a position. Where is he likely to be posted? Well, according to the Humble Administrator's Handbook, the answer depends on when you took the imperial examination and how well you did. During the peak of the Tang dynasty, the government employed around 20,000 bureaucrats. Most of these men would be posted in the central government in the capital of Chang'an. However, due to the sheer number of applicants, most new graduates would be sent to the provinces instead. Those who scored high enough on the exams to qualify as first or second grade scholars would have better odds of being placed in the center. They might also be given more desirable postings, such as a prestigious prefecture or a wealthy county. Lower-ranking officials would usually be sent to less desirable locations. According to an anonymous Han Dynasty text, these were places where the work was hard, pay was low, and the living conditions were terrible. Many prefectures and counties fell into this category, but the worst places to be posted were cold frontier towns, damp rice provinces, and remote mountain villages. This is a bit more likely for our hypothetical character. But even this option isn't exactly easy, since ULL have to compete with thousands of other binyang for a limited number of positions. What's worse is that your status as a binyang only lasts for 3 years. If you can't secure a position in that time frame, you'll fall off the list and will have to start over as a normal graduate. Now, while many people may have studied for decades to take these tests, actually getting a good position requires a bit of luck. Where do you go from here? Well, how about we ask some primary sources? We'll use the following excerpt from an anonymous Tang Dynasty text called The Humble Administrator's Handbook to flesh out the details of everyday life as a new scholar official. After passing the imperial examination and taking the degree of a Master of Arts, one becomes a member of the literary class. Next, he awaits assignment to an office, but meanwhile takes up a temporary post under the Ministry of Revenue, which disperses salaries to officials. 1 month after entering the service, one is assigned an office and a salary. After 6 months, one receives the silk and hemp allowances. The new appointee must prepare himself for his posting. He settles his household affairs, makes arrangements for his journey, buys carriages and mounts, dispatches a letter to inform his family, and then departs. Upon arrival at his new station, he pays court to the local dignitaries. He takes up his quarters, inspects the offices, studies the records, assesses the staff, and makes plans for the coming year. Generally speaking, the further you climb up the bureaucratic ladder, the higher your chances of getting a cushy sinecure, a noble title, and lots of money. However, even if you do get lucky and wind up at the top of the pile, don't expect to get everything you want. At sea, whether you like it or not, the state will assign you to a position that it needs filled. So you might end up somewhere or doing something you never wanted to. Also, since you've never held an official position before, you won't be given much choice over where you start either. For all intents and purposes, you're still a low-level government peon. Even the top scholars have to start somewhere at the bottom. So congratulations, you've been placed at the very bottom of the bureaucratic ladder. As you can see, the first thing you'll do is wait for your posting while working a cushy sinecure for the Ministry of Revenue. But before we move on to your daily life as a lowly bureaucrat, I want to talk a little bit more about this assignment process. However, there was another kind of graduate called the Bingen. Alright, so with all that being said, let's assume that our protagonist has managed to land a job in the imperial bureaucracy. Now that we know where you might be posted, let's talk a little bit more about your daily life as a Chinese bureaucrat. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that officials work odd hours. Another interesting detail about the daily life of a bureaucrat is that they were not allowed to eat at their desks. Finally, let's wrap up this video with a discussion about advancement in the civil service. So what do you think? How does the life of a Chinese bureaucrat compare to the glamorous image we usually see today? Imagine being an unlettered peasant with little prospects, having to pay exorbitant taxes to the local lord. While he sits in his magnificent palace made of stone and gold, he takes advantage of you because you have no means to fight back. If you did your duty for the emperor, you were rewarded with glory and riches. But in practice, things were quite different. Welcome to my channel. When you rise through the bureaucratic ranks, your responsibilities increase, and we can identify 3 reasons why. The first reason was social status. Being a scholar official was the highest honor one could achieve in Chinese society. From the 9th century until the end of the imperial examination system in 1905, a total of 378,483 men passed the national exams, earning the coveted title of Jinshi. And remember to subscribe for more videos about ancient China. It's less than 1% of all applicants, which goes to show you how difficult it was to become a bureaucrat. Passing the civil service exams was considered the ultimate test of knowledge and virtue. And once they passed, Jinshi enjoyed high social status and government employment for life. Even if they fell out of favor and got exiled, former bureaucrats were still treated with respect. After all, they once held prestigious government positions. And then there was the wealth. Due to the introduction of paper currency during the Song dynasty, government officials were able to accumulate huge fortunes. Take Han Qi, for example. Took the civil service exams in 1053 and died in 1127, serving mostly as an envoy and diplomat. Throughout his long career, he amassed a fortune estimated to be around $15 million in today's money. Other high-ranking officials like Su Ji and Yan Shu accumulated similar fortunes. And finally, there was the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. Ever since Confucius established the imperial bureaucracy 2,000 years earlier, boys were taught to aspire to this position. They read his books, memorized his teachings, and wrote endless essays on how to serve the emperor. For generations, the Chinese elite competed with one another to produce the most competent and virtuous bureaucrats. So you can imagine how great it must have felt for an ordinary peasant's son to have his name written in the Imperial Gazette, a testament to his diligence, intelligence, and faithfulness. You get involved in bigger projects and have more opportunities to make money, but at the same time, you attract more attention. The job was safer during the golden age of the Han dynasty and more dangerous when the empire entered a period of decline. The Temps and Song bureaucracies were certainly more professional and stable than their predecessors during the Warring States and early Han periods. However, it's also true that the higher you climbed in the imperial hierarchy, the greater the scrutiny and the more vulnerable you became. Because no matter how good you were at your job, it only took one wrong step, one anonymous letter, one corrupt supervisor, or one jealous colleague to end your entire career. As a minor official, you can easily hide your ill-gotten gains. But when you start building enormous public works projects, you must report those expenditures to the Ministry of Revenue. Naturally, the ministry wants to know the source of your funding, especially if it's public money. And so every brick that you lay, every mile of road you build, and every dam that you construct becomes another opportunity for a financial audit. But audits don't just happen by accident. Usually they're triggered by a letter to the censor, secret letters, anonymous reports, sudden audits. One accusation was enough to ruin your career. In fact, getting accused of something was just as bad as being convicted because clearing your name was nearly impossible. There was no legal recourse. The bureaucrats had no choice but to trust the emperor's investigators. And oftentimes the investigator already had a preconceived notion of the case. As for evidence, well, witnesses were easily intimidated. Suspects conveniently disappeared, and paperwork could always be forged. Even the way a book is opened and closed could be used against you. If the emperor suspected you of malfeasance, they would summon you to the capital for questioning. If found guilty, you lost your office, got stripped of your rank, and were exiled to some barren province. Demise and exile. Death was a rare punishment reserved for the most heinous crimes, like misappropriating disaster relief funds. Officials were usually given a more elegant exit strategy: demotion and exile. Demotion meant losing prestige, power, and income. Your new office might be hundreds or even thousands of miles away from your home province, which meant leaving your family behind. It also meant starting all over again, making new contacts, and climbing up the career ladder from scratch. Sometimes an imperial decree would order the whole family to relocate. Wives and children would lose their privileged status, servants would lose their jobs, and houses and gardens would be sold at unfair prices. If the exile was meant to last any length of time, the family had to downsize and leave most of their belongings behind. Oh, and wherever you were exiled to, life was hard. The emperor never sent enough resources for resettlement, so exiles often had to rely on the goodwill of local officials, which was rare. And to add insult to injury, the travel expenses were deducted from whatever meager salary you were left with. As you can imagine, most exiles saw this coming. Once they received the dreaded summons to the capital, they rushed to distribute their property to relatives, bribed passing officials to alter documents, and fled to remote mountain villages, disguising themselves as merchants or pilgrims. However, sometimes downfall came suddenly, without warning, for no apparent reason, and the effect was devastating. These unlucky bureaucrats would often die within a few years of exile, killed by disease, stress, or the elements. Today, we are going to take a look at the downside of being a Chinese bureaucrat. In turn, that same lord has to pay tribute to the next ruler in the chain. And eventually, some percentage of that tribute ends up reaching the imperial court in the faraway capital city. How do you think the administrator feels when he has to report to his boss about how much money he received? In theory, Chinese bureaucrats were supposed to rule according to Confucian values. Corruption was everywhere. First of all, let's be clear. Corruption was not completely absent from the ranks of Chinese bureaucrats. It's just that the kind of corruption that existed was very different from what we see today. To understand this difference, let us first try and put ourselves in the shoes of an average Song Dynasty bureaucrat. You might call him Mr. Li. After passing the civil service exams, Mr. Li got himself a prestigious job as a judge in a mid-sized city. With a salary of around 300 bolts of silk per year, Mr. Li is doing well for himself. As a low-level official, he has to do a lot of entertaining. Local merchants, wealthy landowners, anxious peasants, ambitious scholars, and visiting dignitaries expect him to wine and dine them. And if Mr. Li does not reciprocate these courtesies, people won't hesitate to write a letter to the censorate, accusing him of misconduct. Furthermore, most bureaucratic positions require extra spending. A magistrate presiding over a flood relief fund, for example, needs a boat to inspect the damage. Transporting grain to remote mountain villages requires trucks, and investigating a lawsuit between two noble families needs servants and guards who will foot the bill, most likely Mr. Li, because, come on, he's a government official. Plus, he can deduct these expenses from his salary, so everybody wins. But in reality, the money comes from the taxpayers. By accepting bribes, Mr. Li is stealing public funds. And if caught, he can get himself into deep trouble. So he only accepts small tokens of appreciation, right? Well, it depends. If Mr. Li is a lowly scribe, he might be tempted to steal a few copper coins from the public granary. After all, there are no repercussions. If caught, he will probably get fired. But then he can always find work as a clerk somewhere else. But what if he's a magistrate now? His decision to convict or acquit someone is worth a lot of money. If he rules in favor of the rich merchant, he gets a hefty bribe. If he convicts the powerful aristocrat, he might get blacklisted by the nobility forever. Because Mr. Li faced the same dilemma again and again throughout his career. And in such circumstances, gray corruption was inevitable. A judge might take a small bribe to pass a favorable judgment, but he would hardly go as far as sentencing an innocent man to death. Just to remind you folks, this is ancient China we're talking about. So while this type of petty corruption was ubiquitous, major cases of bribery, embezzlement, and extortion were relatively rare. The higher the position, the more dangerous it gets. But still they came. Despite all the downsides, bright young men from all over China eagerly sought bureaucratic positions. Now, obviously, we cannot generalize the experience of every single bureaucrat across 2,000 years of Chinese history. Thank you for watching. This is the Silk Road. Today, we are taking a break from trade goods and spices and famous travelers. We are looking instead at careers, because if you're a commoner in late imperial China, there is one surefire way to elevate yourself and your family to the heights of society. Get a good job in the imperial bureaucracy. Only problem is, it's also one of the hardest careers imaginable. Like seriously, don't try this at home. Let us now turn to the later years, who made no critical errors, who pleased the emperor, who avoided the traps of corruption. A rare reward waited. Didn't you tell me that it involved helping the people? Well, yes, but not necessarily in this scenario. See, the vast majority of civil servants were like the mid-level manager of an accounting firm. Respectable, important, but ultimately serving without much recognition. Only a very small percentage of government positions came with much power at all. And those positions were usually filled by members of the elite. Maybe it was the knowledge that your life hung in the balance. Couldn't bear to let anyone else edit a document. You couldn't stomach the idea of a subordinate making a decision on your behalf. No, you were a control freak and you knew it. Wrong, Dao. You totally embrace the hustle culture. You leave behind a rich legacy of poetry and calligraphy and erotic paintings. People remember you fondly. It's a second version. You're not having it. You fight back. You appeal to the emperor's sense of justice. You threaten to go to the Hanlin. You accuse your colleagues of jealousy. Nothing works. You're forced out of office, humiliated and penniless. You return home, defeated and bitter. Your sons resent you. Your daughters avoid you. It's not exactly the happy ending you were hoping for. But hey, what can you do? Life rarely goes the way you want it to. That's part of the human condition. Certainly part of the Chinese bureaucratic experience. You have no one but the memory of your former glory. Till then, please don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. It really helps us out. Check out our other channels for more history and travel. Thanks for watching. See you next week. You work harder than ever. You double down on self-improvement. You devour books on health and fitness. You hire a team of masseurs and acupuncturists. You eat only healthy food. You exercise religiously. You take cold showers. You don't sleep much, but you sleep deeply. You start meditating. You study ancient texts on longevity. Begin attending spiritual retreats. And year after year, you defy the odds. So while you may have wanted to delegate, you couldn't. That meant nothing changed. By 70, you have to wear glasses full-time, but you refuse to slow down. At 75, you suffer your first major setback. A mistake in your division leads to a scandal. Your colleagues cover for you, but the damage is done. The emperor calls you in and offers you a choice. Retire with honor, or get pushed out the door. Well, don't count on it. Let's face it, most people don't remember the bureaucrats who came before them, and that includes the Chinese. Only a very small percentage of officials had their names etched in marble. Handful became model officials, bureaucrats whose deeds were praised in Confucian classrooms for centuries to come. But most were forgotten. Their scrolls archived unread, their portraits left to fade, their grandsons unable to recall which province they governed. That's right. If you spent a lifetime studying to get ahead, there's a good chance no one will even know your name. continued to put in long hours, but the quality of your work began to decline. You missed errors. Deadlines slipped by. The cautious bureaucrat was gone. Or maybe it was the realization that you couldn't control your own destiny after all. If you were living in the early modern era and have spent a half-century working for the government, you're probably due for retirement anyway. So why not go out on top? After all, you've earned it. You continue to push forward, trying to maintain your old pace, despite the effects of age and illness. You become reckless. You trust the wrong person. You make a single critical error. The emperor finds out. You're banished from office, stripped of your rank, and sent home with a pension. Your house is searched. Your possessions are confiscated. Your sons find other jobs. Your daughters are married off to the highest bidder, and you are left alone, bitter and disgraced. That's one ending. Whatever the case, you knew you couldn't keep doing what you were doing. Something had to change. After realizing that your health and thus your career were at risk, you did something radical. You decided to follow the Tao. You embraced simplicity. You began to see through the trappings of wealth and power. You cut your expenses and lived frugally. You hired a good cook and ate well. You surrounded yourself with virtuous friends and enjoyed their company. You took long walks in the countryside and marveled at the natural world. You found a beautiful wife and lived with her quietly. You studied philosophy and practiced meditation. You learned to accept whatever fortune smiled upon you. You sought not to dominate nature, but to live in harmony with it. Even someone who passed the prestigious civil service exams with flying colors and got a coveted appointment to the Hanlon Academy still had to work his way up. At best, he'd be spending his days writing speeches for the emperor or editing official documents. At worst, he'd be shunted off to some backwater province where the work was menial and the pay was poor and the bandits were vicious. It's promotion to high office, advisor to the emperor, perhaps even the grand secretary, a title few dared even dream of. This came with immense respect, but our story doesn't end here. No, because this is history. The dirty work must go on. You put on weight. Your eyesight got worse. You needed reading glasses. The first hint that your youth has slipped away forever. Then you realized that everyone else around you was getting older too. Your colleagues started to die. You attended their funerals and bowed 3 times before their coffins. Each bow took more effort than the last. At some point, you realized you weren't going to live forever either. And that fact pressed down on you like a stone. You began to take stock. Was this it? Was all the striving and the ambition all there ever was? Is that all you'd have to show for half a lifetime? You thought of your children, of your grandchildren, and of your legacy? You imagined the deeds you might accomplish in the last phase of your career. The difference you could make if only you could stay healthy a little while longer. Audiences at court, poets writing verses in your honor, your name listed in the official histories. Family status rose as well. Your sons gained access to better tutors. Your daughters married into higher families. Your ancestors were honored in better temples. All of it, thanks to your decades at the desk. We've talked about how civil servants in late imperial China had awesome robes and fancy feasts, and probably drove around in some kind of horse-drawn carriage. But while these perks are pretty great, let's be honest, a real devotee of the way, the Tao, doesn't do this sort of thing for the small stuff. No, a man of true integrity will work for the greater good to help others, to serve his community, and also because he wants to get ahead in the world. The long shadow cast by a career in the imperial bureaucracy, when the hair turned gray, when the ink brush trembled, when ambition gave way to ritual. What did it all mean? We'll answer that question today by looking at how the system worked for the super high achievers, those who got top grades on their exams and whose entire lives were devoted to working for the emperor. To hear more about how all this works, check out last week's episode. This week we're looking at the end of the road, with the few who endured. But wait, you may be thinking, didn't you just say that being a bureaucrat was the highest form of public service? If you want a nice little life storybook ending, then this is a good time to click away. As you slowly clambered up the ladder, several things happened to you. First, you got older, and then you got sick. Once you recovered, something inside you was different. Maybe it was the fever itself. You tried to delegate more work. But here's the thing. After decades of doing everything yourself, trust was a hard habit to break. Now, this is where our 2 possible endings diverge. In one storyline, you don't change. But let's look at the other path, the one taken by the truly great, Wait, no, sorry. At age 60, your health begins to decline. You need reading glasses now. At 65, your eyesight gets worse. What happens next depends on who you are. In the first version, you graciously accept the Emperor's offer and spend your remaining days traveling, composing poetry, and having affairs. Oh no, and then you die.
Now we know this may seem like a dark ending to a historical tale, but think about it.
But what about the possibility that you left behind a rich legacy that people remembered you fondly? So yeah, you can probably skip the retirement home and go straight to the grave. Next week, we re-gone, take a look at another career option available to the educated elite of late imperial China. And so, the story of a lowly official, who climbed slowly, who sat quietly, who wrote carefully and bowed often, comes to its end. No battles won, no enemies slain, no monuments erected, just documents reviewed, taxes counted, orders delivered on time. And yet, this was the machinery of an empire. Not the soldiers, not the generals, but the silent ones behind the curtain. The men with tired eyes and cramped fingers. The ones who stayed late to fix a miscopied name on a rice shipment. The ones who never shouted, never rebelled, never became famous. Only steady, only obedient, only forgotten. And now, as your own eyes grow heavier, as your breath deepens and slows, let the hum of that ancient bureaucracy wrap around you like a warm, faded robe. Let the endless scrolls, the muffled footsteps of court messengers, and the rustle of paper and candlelight lull you gently into sleep. You are safe. The taxes have been recorded. The forms are in order. The empire endures. Good night.